Hi.
I'm Olivia.
My sister used to tell me I'd die alone. She didn't scream it in anger or even whisper it in jealousy. She said it casually, like stating the weather or noting the price of milk. A fact, not an insult. A future, not a possibility. I remember the first time she said it. I was 16, curled up on the couch with a book in hand and glasses slipping down my nose, and she looked at me from across the room with a soft chuckle. "You'll probably die alone, you know that, right?" Then she turned back to painting her nails, like she hadn't just planted a seed that would bloom inside me for years. Maybe she thought it was harmless, a joke wrapped in sisterly teasing. But I heard it enough times that it stopped feeling like a joke and started sounding like a sentence. Like she had looked at me, really looked, and found me lacking. She was everything I wasn't. Sleek, popular, loud in a way that made people lean closer rather than flinch away. She had the kind of charisma that sucked the air from the room and left people gasping for more. I was the background music to her lead vocal. Our parents adored her. Teachers praised her. Boys chased her. And I just watched. I watched her win homecoming court, watched her sneak into parties I wasn't invited to, watched her spin lies that people loved more than they'd ever love my truths. I watched, and I listened, and I learned to disappear in plain sight. They called it the quiet phase, my withdrawal. My mom blamed hormones. My dad said I just needed to get out more. But it wasn't a phase. It was a shield. I started building walls the way other girls collected charm bracelets. Every time my sister called me boring or weird or too much in the wrong ways, I added a new layer. I buried myself so deep I didn't even flinch when she got engaged before finishing college. She met some finance guy at a rooftop party in LA, posted a diamond ring with a filter that turned it into something out of a magazine, and just like that, she became someone else's forever. And still, she told me I'd be alone. Not with malice. Just certainty. When I was 24, I moved to another city. I didn't tell her until the day before. "Just want to try something new?" I texted. Her reply was a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. I packed my life into a rented truck and drove 6 hours to a place I had no connections, no promises, just a rented studio apartment and a job offer from a startup that sounded too risky to be real. I said yes anyway, because sometimes risk feels like air when you've been suffocating. The first 6 months were hard. I barely made rent. I ate instant noodles and rationed gas. But for the first time, the silence in my life felt like mine. I didn't hear her voice echoing off the walls. I didn't wake up to comparisons. I didn't get labeled too quiet or too intense. I just existed, and that was enough. And then, one night, I met Eli. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't even like at first sight. He spilled coffee on my shoes at a co-working space and didn't apologize fast enough. I snapped at him. He rolled his eyes. That should have been the end of it. But then we ran into each other again. And again. The city was big, but our circles kept overlapping. I started noticing things. The way he always left a little extra tip. The way he remembered small details, like how I hated cilantro and loved thunderstorms. The way he listened. Not just heard, but really listened. 3 months later, he kissed me in the rain. 6 months later, I met his parents. A year in, we moved in together. And all the while, I kept hearing my sister's voice in the back of my mind. "You'll die alone." But I wasn't alone. I was building something. Something real. Eli wasn't perfect. He left dishes in the sink and forgot birthdays. He worked late hours and sometimes forgot to respond to texts. But he loved me in a way that made my chest ache. He made space for me, not just in his home, but in his life. I started writing again. Started dreaming bigger. I got promoted. I led meetings. I wore red lipstick and didn't apologize for being seen. And still, I didn't tell my sister. It wasn't until the night Eli proposed that I finally reached for my phone. He did it quietly at home, with fairy lights and a playlist of songs we'd fallen asleep to. The ring was simple. The love behind it wasn't. My hands trembled when I texted her. "I'm engaged." She replied 30 minutes later. "To who?"
No congratulations. No emoji.
Just those 2 words, clipped and cold. I sent a photo. No reply. 2 days passed before she called. "Are you serious?" she asked. I said yes. "You really think this is going to last?" I paused. Said yes again. She hung up. I didn't invite her to the engagement dinner. She didn't ask why. Planning the wedding was a blur. Eli wanted something small. I wanted something meaningful. We compromised. A vineyard in Northern California. 70 guests. Soft jazz and lavender sprigs and handwritten vows. I didn't tell my family until the venue was booked, the dress ordered, the photographer signed. When I sent out the invitations, I didn't expect her to come. But she RSVP'd yes. Bridesmaid box delivered 2 days later. She didn't call, didn't text, just checked the box. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt like walking a tightrope. Eli noticed my tension. I brushed it off. Said it was just stress. But the truth was, her silence was louder than ever. It followed me into dress fittings and cake tastings. It whispered in the back of my mind every time I chose flowers or napkin colors. What if she was right? What if I really wasn't meant to be loved like this? The night before the wedding, she arrived at the rehearsal dinner. Late. Dressed like she was going to a club, not a family gathering. She hugged Eli's mom too long and ignored me completely. My parents didn't say anything, just smiled awkwardly, like hoping it wouldn't escalate. I held my breath the whole evening. That night, she sent me a text. Just one line. "Let's talk before the ceremony." My stomach twisted. I didn't reply. Morning came wrapped in fog and lavender. I woke up in the bridal suite, surrounded by the quiet hum of stylists and steamers. My dress hung near the window, glowing in the morning light. I should have felt excited. I should have felt joy. But I felt like I was waiting for something to go wrong. At noon, the coordinator said my sister was in the hall. Waiting. I nodded. My feet moved before my heart agreed. I stepped out, met her eyes. She didn't say hello. She looked me up and down, eyes scanning the silk robe, the bare feet, the nervous smile I couldn't quite swallow. Then she said it. "You still look alone." And just like that, the seed she planted bloomed again. All that work, every brick I'd laid, every step I'd taken, every moment I had chosen myself, shook under the weight of those words. But this time, something else rose, too. Something stronger. Something rooted not in her vision of me, but in my own. I took a deep breath. I stepped back. And I closed the door. She didn't follow. She still walked down the aisle later, dress pressed, smile tight. But something in me had shifted. Something permanent. And that was only the beginning. The ceremony went on like something out of a dream I hadn't dared to have for most of my life. Rows of white chairs, strings of soft lights tangled in trees, lavender bunches tied to each seat with twine. The officiant spoke with the kind of quiet reverence that made each word feel carved into time. When Eli turned to face me, I saw no doubt in his eyes. Just warmth. Just home. My sister stood 3 people down from me in the line of bridesmaids, her eyes carefully blank. Not angry, not sad, just detached. Like a guest who stumbled into the wrong story and didn't care enough to leave. But she smiled for the photos. She clinked her glass at the reception. She even gave a toast. A short one, with just enough sting to make me tighten my grip around my champagne flute. "To my sister," she said, holding her glass high, "the one I never thought would walk down an aisle before me." But hey, sometimes surprises happen. A few chuckles. A few confused glances. Eli didn't laugh. He just reached for my hand under the table and squeezed. The reception went on. Music, laughter, the thud of dance floor heels. But part of me floated above it all, watching from a distance. I saw my parents posing for pictures like everything had always been fine. I saw my sister dancing with Eli's cousin, spinning too fast, laughing too loud. I saw the way she avoided my eyes, even when she toasted again with the other bridesmaids, shouting to love, like she believed it. When it was time to toss the bouquet, she stepped forward. I hadn't expected that. Hadn't even considered she'd want to catch it. But there she was, front and center, arms up like a challenge. I threw the flowers high, too high. They landed behind her, straight into the hands of my old college roommate. My sister didn't turn around. She just lowered her arms and walked away. That night, Eli and I stayed at a nearby inn, tucked between rolling hills and rows of sleeping vines. I should have been exhausted, but my mind kept replaying her toast, her look, her silence. It wasn't sadness. It was something else. Something I couldn't name yet, but that scratched at the edges of peace. The next morning, my phone lit up with a message. Not from her. From a number I didn't recognize. Congratulations, Mrs. Millionaire. Let's hope the money keeps him faithful. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. Eli stirred beside me, still half asleep, murmuring something about breakfast. I turned the phone off without replying. Later that day, after coffee and croissants, I checked my bank app. Not out of suspicion, just routine. But when I scrolled through the activity, I saw something strange. A charge from a luxury bridal boutique I'd never visited. A few $1,000s. Then another. A hotel stay in New York, dated 2 weeks before the wedding. My heart stalled. I opened my laptop, logged into the joint account we hadn't even used yet. More charges. All under my name. All unapproved. Eli saw my face change. He sat beside me, still in pajama pants, frowning. I told him what I saw. He leaned in, clicking through the statements. "This isn't me," he said. "I've never even been to that place." I believed him. The purchases weren't his style. The dresses weren't mine. But someone had used my card. Someone who knew the account details. Someone close. I called the bank. They flagged the account immediately, froze the card, began the investigation. "We'll be in touch," the agent said. But this was likely someone who had access to your personal info. I already knew who it was. My sister had helped me book a cake tasting 2 months ago. She'd borrowed my wallet to double-check the card while I was on a call. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now the memory felt different. Sharper. Intentional. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more than suspicion. 2 days later, the bank emailed me the IP logs for the purchases. The transactions had come from a device in Los Angeles. Her city. Her building, in fact. I remembered the address. She'd posted it once when showing off her new balcony view. The boutique receipt had a name on the confirmation. C. McCall. Her middle name. Mine too. A coincidence? No. A cover. I printed everything and folded it into a plain envelope. No letter. No note. Just facts. I mailed it to her. No text. No warning. The silence that followed lasted 3 weeks. Eli and I returned to normal life, or tried to. I went back to work. He started talking about honeymoon destinations. But something in me remained alert, like a wire pulled too tight. Then the text came. "You're really going to do this? Over some dresses?" I stared at the message, then showed it to Eli. "Do what?" I typed back. She didn't answer. But 2 days later, she posted a long message on Instagram about betrayal and how some people just can't handle watching others shine. The caption dripped with self-pity, vague enough to be deniable, pointed enough to draw lines. Comments flooded in. Her friends comforted her. "You're better off without toxic people. Cut the snakes." One of them even tagged me. I didn't reply. I didn't unfollow. I just watched. But she didn't stop there. A week later, Eli received an email. No subject line. No message. Just a photo attachment. It was old. From years ago. Me, asleep on a couch at a college party, mouth open, sharp mustache drawn across my face. Someone had written a date on the photo, added a caption. "This is who she really is." We both stared at it. "Who sent this?" I asked. He checked the address. Untraceable. But I knew. That same night, a burner account messaged my boss, tagging me in a thread about fraudulent purchases and reputation risks. They weren't enough to get me fired, but enough to raise eyebrows. I sat through 2 meetings where my supervisor asked me gently if there was anything going on I might want to share. I said no, but I started compiling everything. the transactions, the messages, the photos. I created a folder labeled Truth. And then I got another message. This time, from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd seen something strange. A new GoFundMe campaign. Help Cassie rebuild after family betrayal. It was my sister's face in the photo. Her story? My sister stole my inheritance and spread lies to destroy my career. I didn't even know what inheritance she meant. The page had already raised over $3,000. I called the platform, reported the campaign, sent them documentation. It was taken down within the day, but the damage had already rippled. People chose sides. Some sent messages of support. Others accused me of being jealous, bitter, vindictive. Even my mother called. "Can't you two just move on?" she asked. I didn't answer. That weekend, Eli and I drove to a cabin 2 hours away. No phones, no Wi-Fi, just air and quiet. We sat by the fire that night, drinking cider, and I asked him the question I'd been afraid of. What if she ruins everything? He looked at me, eyes steady. Then we rebuild it, together. His answer didn't fix the fear, but it anchored me. When we returned, my lawyer had news. The investigation had confirmed her name was used fraudulently in several transactions. They could file charges, but it would be public, messy, real. I hesitated, not because she didn't deserve consequences, but because I wasn't sure if I was ready to be the one who handed them over. I hadn't seen her in weeks. Then one day, I passed by a cafe window and there she was, alone, scrolling through her phone. Her face looked different. Tired. Pale. Like someone slowly unraveling. She didn't see me. I kept walking. Later that night, she texted, "If I show up at your door, will you open it?" I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the message either. That was when I knew the story wasn't finished yet. And the next part? I was going to write it, not her. The message sat on my screen like a trap I couldn't quite see the mechanics of. "If I show up at your door, will you open it?" I read it again the next morning, as sunlight filtered through our blinds and Eli's quiet breathing filled the space beside me. I didn't reply, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted access, and access was the one thing I wasn't giving her anymore. Still, something inside me flinched every time the elevator stopped on our floor, every time a knock came at the door. My nerves curled tighter with each hour of silence. I started sleeping lighter. I backed to my laptop again. I even set new passwords for every account I could think of. I didn't want to admit it, but I was afraid of my own sister. 2 days later, a package arrived. No return address. Just my name, written in the exact cursive she'd learned from copying my handwriting in middle school. I didn't open it immediately. I left it on the counter, like it was humming with electricity. But curiosity is a quiet ache, and eventually I gave in. Inside, there was a box of old photos. Us as kids, laughing in inflatable pools, wearing Halloween costumes, sitting cross-legged on our grandmother's carpet with popsicles in hand. At the very bottom, there was a note, hand-scrawled and rushed. "We were best friends once. You know that, right? Before everything changed. Before you stopped needing me." No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just a subtle pull at something old and sentimental, like luring a deer with sugar cubes before slamming the gate shut. I didn't respond. A week passed. Then the email came. It was from a journalist. Subject: request for comment. Family feud or financial fraud. The body was short, direct. They were writing a piece on modern sibling rivalries and financial disputes among family. "Your sister Cassie has agreed to be interviewed," it read. "We would like to include your perspective to keep the story balanced. Please let us know if you'd be open to a conversation." I sat down hard in the kitchen chair. Eli looked up from his laptop, concern tightening his expression. I forwarded him the email without a word. She was going public. Not just with rumors, not with vague posts or whispers behind social media curtains. She wanted to tell her story, rewrite it under bright lights and headlines, where sympathy lived in comment sections and screenshots lived forever. I didn't reply to the journalist. Not yet. Instead, I opened the truth folder I'd been building. I added the screenshots, the receipts, the GoFundMe logs, the banking statements. I labeled each file clearly. I printed them all. Then I reached out to the journalist. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. She was polite, younger than I expected, with a recorder she placed carefully on the table between us. Off the record first, she offered. I just want to understand. So I told her. Not everything.
Not yet.
But enough. I spoke of the wedding, of the fraudulent purchases, of the anonymous attacks. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I just laid it out piece by piece, like a blueprint of how you lose someone not because they leave, but because they keep twisting who you are. The article was published a week later. When family becomes a brand, inside a viral sister fallout. It was careful, not accusatory, not scandalous, but it told both sides. My sister's version of being cut off and disrespected, and my version of quiet endurance turned to self-defense. The reporter had done her homework. She didn't take sides. But the facts spoke louder than spin. I didn't share the article, but other people did. It caught traction in places I hadn't expected. A local morning show, a podcast about toxic families, Reddit. Strangers started messaging me. Some kind, some cruel. Most of them just echoing back the same sentiment. You're not alone. That part one hadn't expected. The wave of women, some men, who said they'd been there too, supporting everyone else until they cracked, being erased, then blamed. It was comforting and heartbreaking, like staring into a hall of mirrors where every reflection nodded back in recognition. Then came the next twist. My employer reached out. Corporate HR, polite, formal. Someone had submitted an anonymous tip claiming I had engaged in fraud. They included a link to the article, twisted and highlighted out of context. We just need to clarify a few things, the email read. We're sure it's nothing. I met with them the next day. I came armed. Documents, receipts, timelines. I presented them calmly, like a lawyer in her own trial. When I finished, they thanked me for my professionalism. This seems like a personal matter, they said, but if anything else arises, please keep us informed. It didn't cost me my job, but it cost me more peace. That night, I stared at the ceiling and whispered the words I hadn't dared to speak out loud yet. She's trying to destroy me, and not out of anger, but survival. If I disappeared, if my credibility crumbled, if Eli walked, if the world saw me as unstable, then the version of her story, where she was the good one, would stand tall and unchallenged. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. And that's when I decided to do the one thing she never expected. I called my lawyer. We began the process of filing an official civil claim for damages and defamation. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about drawing a line in legal ink, something she couldn't delete or deflect or twist into sentiment. When the paperwork was delivered, she called me for the first time in months. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. I hope you're proud of yourself. You're turning your back on family. On blood. Then a pause. And when Eli leaves you, because he will, don't come crying to me. I saved the message. 3 days later, I got a message from Joy, my niece. She was 13 now, sharp and quiet like I had been, before everything got loud. Is it true?
What she's saying about you.
I sent her a single sentence. Truth doesn't have to scream. It waits. And it stands. She didn't reply right away. But a week later, a small envelope arrived. Inside was a drawing. Me and her on a bench, both holding books. A note in her tiny script. She yells, "You build." I cried then. The kind of crying that's not sadness or relief, but release. Like air rushing back into lungs after too long underwater. By the time the court date arrived, the media had mostly moved on. The wave had crashed, receded. But she still came. Dressed in white, like a bride walking down the aisle to ruin someone else's name. She had a lawyer. So did I. We didn't look at each other much. Just sat at opposite tables while the judge reviewed the claims. It didn't last long. The bank records were clear. The charges were confirmed. Her use of my name, my accounts, my identity, it was documented. The defamatory messages linked to her IP. The evidence built itself like a wall around the truth. The judgment favored me. She wasn't fined heavily, but she was required to make a formal, written retraction and pay restitution for the fraudulent charges. She couldn't post about me publicly again. Not unless she wanted to risk a much more serious charge next time. She signed the papers with a shaking hand. She didn't look up. When it was over, I walked out of the courtroom alone. Not because no one was with me, but because I wanted to. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and removed the last photo I'd kept on my dresser, me and her in matching pajamas from Christmas years ago. I didn't burn it. I didn't tear it up. I just placed it in a drawer, shut it gently. Some things didn't need to be destroyed to be left behind. Months passed. The emails stopped. The rumors died. My name stayed whole. Eli and I went on our honeymoon, Italy, warm breezes, no internet. We hiked cliffs and drank wine and laughed with strangers who only knew us by our first names. We didn't speak of her once. And when we returned, I received one final message. A postcard. No return address. Just a mountain lake and 3 words scribbled on the back. I lost. Congratulations. I didn't smile. I didn't ache. I just slipped it into the same drawer as the photo and closed it again. That chapter was over. But the story? Mine was just beginning. After the court ruling, silence wrapped itself around my life like a strange, unfamiliar comfort. The kind of silence that didn't sting, didn't weigh, but still made you glance over your shoulder. For the first time in over a year, no anonymous emails landed in my inbox. No cryptic posts surfaced on social media. No burner accounts tagged me with accusations. The quiet felt like a clean wound, still healing, still tender, but no longer bleeding. But healing is never linear. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare. It creeps in slowly, in the way you breathe deeper, sleep longer, forget to check your phone every 5 minutes. I started to live again. Not as a defense, but as a choice. I took a weekend retreat upstate with Eli. I signed a new lease for a larger office. I even enrolled in a creative writing course just for me. Then, one cold morning in February, the second twist came. I was sorting through mail in the lobby of our apartment building when I found an envelope without a stamp. It hadn't been mailed. It had been slipped under the door or through the front desk. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My sister's. And inside, a letter. She wrote that she'd left LA, that she was starting over somewhere quiet, and didn't expect forgiveness. But she wanted something else, a chance to tell me her version, not through lawyers or articles or half-truths, but face-to-face. She included an address. A small coastal town 3 hours away. No phone number. Just a note. If you ever want to know why. Really know. I read it twice, folded it, and tucked it into my purse. I didn't tell Eli at first. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wasn't sure how to explain it.
Not yet.
I needed to sit with it, let it settle in the part of my heart that hadn't calcified. The part that still wondered. Why? The following week, I went. Alone. It was raining when I arrived. The town was small, the kind that seemed paused in time. One diner, a bait shop, and a string of quiet houses with peeling shutters and cracked fences. Her address was on a gravel road near the edge of town, tucked behind a row of tall pine trees. She opened the door before I knocked. As if she'd been waiting. She looked older. Not just in her face, but in her posture, her eyes. The confidence that once screamed through every step was dulled now, cautious, like someone who'd learned the cost of being seen too clearly. We sat in her kitchen, tea between us, untouched. For a long time we said nothing. Then she spoke. "I used to think you had it easy," she said. "The good grades, the quiet approval. You never needed to fight for attention. You never had to perform for it." I didn't interrupt. "I needed people to love me," she continued. "And when they didn't, not really, I built mirrors. I made them see what I wanted them to see. And when your life started shining on its own, without performance, without begging for it, I hated you for it. She didn't cry. I didn't either. She told me she'd been in therapy. That the fraud, the lies, the GoFundMe, that wasn't the plan. It just escalated, she said, her voice trailing. When you cut me off, it felt like drowning. And instead of swimming, I started pulling you under. She looked at me, then really looked. And for the first time in years, I saw the girl I'd once painted nails with on rainy afternoons. The girl who used to sneak me cookies and cover for me when I cried over nothing. I don't want back in, she said. I just didn't want to leave without saying the truth. I didn't speak for a long time, not because I didn't have words, but because I finally had a choice in how to use them. I said thank you. Not I forgive you. Not we're okay. Just thank you. I left the letter on her table before I walked out. One I'd written the night before. It didn't justify anything. It didn't accuse. It just listed the truths I needed her to know. The money, the hurt, the fear. The way I still checked dark corners when my inbox chimed. The way she'd hollowed out parts of me I was only just starting to refill.
She didn't chase after me.
And I didn't look back. When I returned home, Eli was waiting with takeout and open arms. I told him everything. He listened, patient and steady, then asked only one question. Do you feel lighter?
I did.
Spring arrived, slow and soft. I turned 30 that March, a quiet dinner with Eli and a few close friends. Joy mailed me a handmade card, drawn in colored pencil. A girl with a cape, flying over a mountain. The note read, "You're still the bravest person I know." I framed it. At work, things bloomed. I was offered a speaking engagement at a national conference, something I would have once turned down out of fear of being seen. Now I accepted. I stood on stage weeks later, lights hot against my skin, telling my story, not about my sister, but about reclamation. About choosing to live loud after being told you're too much, then not enough, then invisible. Afterward, a woman in her 50s came up to me, eyes glassy. I left my sister behind last year, she said. It still hurts, but now I understand why it had to. I nodded. Sometimes silence is survival, but truth is what sets you free. Summer brought more than heat. Joy came to visit for a weekend. We cooked, painted mugs at a pottery studio, and watched old movies on the couch under a shared blanket. She asked about the wedding again. This time I showed her the photos, the ones where I looked like I belonged in my own life. Do you miss her? She asked quietly. I thought about it, and answered honestly. Sometimes. But I don't miss being erased. She nodded like she understood more than I'd said. The final twist came not with drama, but with something simpler. Closure. A check arrived by mail, restitution, from my sister, signed and dated. The amount wasn't huge, but the message behind it was. Attached was a second envelope. A photo of us from childhood, now taped to a note. I won't rewrite you again. And I hope someday you write me back in, not out of obligation but by choice. I tucked it into the drawer with the others. Not at the front. Not forgotten. Just waiting. Eli and I visited the vineyard where we were married one evening, a year to the day since our wedding. We walked through the rows, the light golden, the sky wide. I never imagined this, I whispered. Me neither, he said. But I'm glad we're here. I took his hand, and for the first time in years, I felt full. No echoes of old wounds. No fear of being cropped out. Just presence. Just peace. And finally, no one else holding the pen to my story but me. Peace, I had learned, was not the absence of noise but the absence of tension. It was the way a room could breathe again after a storm had passed through and rearranged everything. It wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always clean. But it was honest. And I was finally living in it. The months after my sister's restitution check passed like a quiet wind. I didn't hear from her again, not directly. Occasionally I'd catch glimpses, her tagged in someone else's photo at a community fundraiser, or a new blog post on a wellness site credited to her pen name. She was carving out a different life now, parallel to mine but far enough apart that it didn't scrape anymore. And maybe that was the best either of us could hope for. Eli and I settled into routines that didn't feel like repetition. We talked more, laughed more. Sometimes we'd lie on the living room floor on lazy Sunday afternoons, counting the shadows on the ceiling, and talk about the past like it belonged to someone else. Not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because it had lost its grip on the present. Then, one crisp morning in early October, a letter arrived from a law firm. Not mine. Hers. I opened it slowly, expecting drama. What I found instead was unexpected. The letter outlined a petition. My sister was formally requesting to release me as co-signer and guarantor from a financial document tied to a family property, our grandmother's lake house. A place we hadn't spoken about in years. I had forgotten my name was even attached to it, filed in the background of a time when I still said yes without thinking. The property, it explained, was being sold. She had waived all claim to future proceeds under the agreement that I would be entirely removed from the contract. Clean break, no ties. My signature wasn't required. Just my acknowledgement. The letter was careful, almost too careful. Like it didn't want to provoke anything but closure. I signed and sent it back within the hour. The next day, I received a text from Joy. Mom's selling Grandma's place. Did you know? I responded simply. I do now. She didn't ask anything else. But her final reply surprised me. Can we go one more time before it's gone? Just us. Like when I was little. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I wasn't sure if returning to a place soaked in memory would reopen everything I had worked so hard to close. But in the end, the answer was clear.
Yes.
We drove up that Saturday, just the two of us, thermoses of cider packed, windows down, autumn air curling around our shoulders. The lake house hadn't changed much. Still wrapped in peeling paint and decades-old furniture. Still humming with the ghosts of summers past. Inside, we found boxes packed and labeled. Some of them marked donate, others with my sister's name. But the things that mattered, photos, letters, Grandma's recipes, the quilt she'd sewn by hand, those had been left neatly stacked on the coffee table with a sticky note that simply read, "Take what you want. It's yours too." It felt less like abandonment and more like an offering. Joy and I sat on the old porch swing as the sun dipped low, turning the lake into a sheet of gold. She swung slowly, legs now too long to tuck under like before, and told me things I hadn't heard. How school was hard. How Mom still didn't talk about the court stuff. How sometimes she wondered if being kind meant you always had to be quiet. I told her no. Sometimes being kind meant saying the hard thing, and saying it loud. We packed 2 boxes, photos, journals, the wind chimes Grandma had bought on a road trip we'd never taken. I let Joy choose everything. I didn't need relics to remember. I already carried enough of the past inside me. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Not for my sister, not for drama, just to say goodbye to a version of my life that no longer fit. A version built on silence, held together by fear, sharpened by betrayal. I watched it disappear between the trees. Back in the city, things didn't change overnight. But something inside me did. I applied for a fellowship I once thought was out of reach. I accepted an invitation to speak on a national panel about emotional boundaries and financial autonomy. And at one quiet dinner with Eli, over candlelight and leftover risotto, I asked him a question that had lived at the edge of my heart for months. What if we built something of our own? Something that didn't come with any history? He smiled, and I knew he'd already been waiting for me to ask. We didn't buy a house. We bought land. Untouched, just outside the city, near enough to still feel part of the world, but far enough to breathe differently. We spent weekends designing, drawing outlines in the dirt, laughing over floor plans and paint colors and whether a hammock would be too cliché. The ground broke in spring. By summer, the walls were rising, and in the corner of what would one day be my home office, I nailed a photo to the first beam. It was from our wedding, not of me and Eli, but of me standing alone, smiling with a kind of quiet confidence I hadn't seen before. Not waiting to be noticed. Not afraid to be seen. Beneath it, I wrote a note. She said I'd die alone. Instead, I built a life. Then, just before sealing the wall, I slipped one last thing behind it. A copy of the letter my sister had sent from the coast. Not for bitterness, not for memory, but as a marker, a reminder that even the sharpest chapters end, that pain passes, that peace can be built, brick by brick, board by board, from the ashes of a story someone else tried to write for you. Years later, when people ask how I made it through, I tell them this. You survive betrayal not by screaming louder than the lies, but by living louder than the silence they tried to bury you with. You win not by breaking them down, but by refusing to break when they expected you to. You find your way forward not by forgetting the past, but by refusing to let it speak over your future. I never rebuilt my relationship with my sister, but I rebuilt myself. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending of all.